Full disclosure, I work on a truck company. We're not known for our speaking skills, so I'm not a public speaker at all. So if I ramble or if I put you to sleep. I'm just going to talk really quickly, just briefly kind of touch over survival and disaster environment. And sorry, like I said, I got to get used to doing this. We're just going to talk really quickly on survival and the disaster environment. I'm going to talk about...
Sorry, we got to mic you up.
Sorry.
Just hold the thing. The clip you use.
Want to try this one?
Does that work?
I don't know.
That one works.
We have a dark sense of humor in the fire service, so... I'm going to just briefly talk about hazards you're going to encounter in the survival or in the disaster, and then we're going to go over actual hands-on stuff. What's that?
Read the title. Caption.
It says, unwittingly, Irwin has a brush with death. Irwin's walking by, bumping death, and hey, watch the elbows, buddy. So just briefly, we're going to talk about fire, down power lines, natural gas, touch on automobile extrication, flooding, and then we'll talk just really briefly, kind of go over the USAR markings that you might see in a disaster environment after USAR teams move through. So hazards, fire obviously is a big one where you're going to run into and encounter fire. It's pretty self-explanatory. Don't go into a burning building, avoid fire. Don't attempt to enter a building. The big thing with fire, though, is the smoke. There's methyl ethyl bad stuff, a ton of different chemicals and contaminants are in the smoke. So if you're in an area that has a lot of smoke, or if there's an inversion that's pushing the smoke down, do everything you can to avoid going into that smoke. You might have to come back later and research that area after the smoke's died down or it's cleared out. And I'm sorry, I might have jumped ahead. This is just kind of as a team, as you're moving through, doing your searching in the disaster environment. These are just kind of hazards that you would encounter, trying to stay safe as a team, as you're moving and as you're searching. Down power lines. We treat all down power lines as energized. Regardless of whether or not you know that it's a blackout, the whole entire area is completely blacked out, you still treat it as a energized power line. Bear in mind that a line that's on the ground will energize the ground around it. And so the technical safe distance is 100 feet away from the power line. That's not realistic, but if you can give a wide berth, any type of line that you find on the ground, stay a safe distance away and then mark that area out so if someone's coming into the area, they can identify it. If you need to radio command, let them know. In a disaster environment, obviously you're going to have multiple down power lines, so it's not going to be realistic to tell command, but if you can, at least try to mark out that area. Let your team know that there's a down power line and avoid it as all possible. Natural gas. Does anybody recognize that picture? That was in Portland, the natural gas explosion that Portland had, pretty much leveled that building. Morgan was a lieutenant? Yeah, new lieutenant. Yeah, new lieutenant had his meter on, noticed that the meter was spiking up and down, up and down. The building had actually smelled natural gas that pulled the fire alarm, had evacuated, or would have been a lot more significant injuries and casualties. The lieutenant that was standing on the outside of the building, when that building exploded, it shot him across the street. He hit a short concrete wall, ended up with a mid-shaft femur fracture. So there was enough force from that explosion that shot him across an entire city street and still had enough force when it hit the wall to break his femur. So very, very significant. You can see here, this lower right picture, this is typically your residential gas. They're supposed to have they're supposed to have an earthquake type fitting in there that if you have shaking and that gets sheared off, it's supposed to shut off itself. The likelihood is probably not going to happen. If you need to shut it off, there's usually a valve either here or there's a valve that's on the service itself. You'll see it. It looks kind of like a lockout. You can turn that off, and it would normally have where you'd have two holes that would line up, and that would normally be where the gas company would put their padlock. You can turn that off there. That would be for a residential. On a commercial building, they're going to have massive amounts of different services coming in, so your best guess is to shut them all off. It's an odorless gas. The rotten egg smell that you smell from natural gas is the mercaptan. That's the chemical they add into that. Because it's odorless, you have to have some way of identifying that there's a natural gas leak, and so that's what they put in to help people identify that there's some type of, it's described as like a rotten egg smell or a very strong garlic smell. I think everybody's smelled it. If you're inside of a building and you smell natural gas, if you're in during a search and you start to smell any type of gas, exit the building immediately. If you can find the meter, shut the meter off. If you can, open the windows from the outside, open all the doors. Natural gas rises, it's lighter than air, so you get some cross ventilation. You should be able to clear that building out. After an amount of time, re-enter, see if you still smell it. If it's clear, go ahead and enter the building. If you still smell natural gas, obviously move on. Don't go into that building. Most of the radios are not intrinsically safe, so don't use your radios until you're exited out of the building. You've gone a safe distance away from the building, because I don't think most radios we're going to be using in a disaster aren't going to have intrinsically safe radios. So don't try and do any radio comms until you're away from that area. Obviously, don't flip any electrical switches. Don't use a lighter to light your way through the house. You'd be surprised. Automobile accidents. The big thing with automobile accidents is we want to make sure that the vehicle is stable. Turn that vehicle off. Take the keys out of the ignition. Make sure it's in park. You don't want to, if you're doing anything around a vehicle and you're moving a patient on a vehicle, you don't want it to move on you. If it's on a flat surface, or if it's not on a flat surface, it has a potential, obviously, for movement, side shifting, or rolling. One way you can prevent that is deflating the tires. If you've got some type of device where you can pop the tires or even pull the stem out of the valve stem out of the tires, that will keep it from moving. If there's objects around, you can put that under the car before you do that, and that will actually help stabilize as you take the air of the tires as it sinks to the ground. Like a piece of wood, or if you have any type of large object you can kind of shove under the car, that helps stabilize it as you deflate the tire. The big thing about automobiles is that if you can't open the door and pull a patient out of there, if you can't open the door at all, it's going to take some type of heavy extrication. You're not going to be able to do that without some type of tools. So it's going to be a situation where if you've got a patient that's in there and you can't extricate them, you're going to have to move on and go on to the next patient. You can help, because you're not going to be able to get that out without some type of jaws of life type tool to be able to open the door. I'll also be cautious of airbags. The airbags in older vehicles will retain a charge. They've gotten pretty good over the years of now when you turn off, the airbags are supposed to not hold that charge and disconnect from the battery. I still wouldn't trust it. So just keep in mind, if you're on a car wreck and you have like a frontal impact, it has to take impact into the bumper. So if for some reason you see a car and the impact has been above the bumper, there's no damage to the bumper, that limits the amount of danger you have from airbags. If there's direct impact into the bumper, that's where that airbag sensor is stored. So that would be more of a cautious, okay, we've got direct impact into that bumper. We need to make sure that as we're moving around the vehicle, airbags still could deploy. Newer vehicles have side impact bags. They have the drop-down curtain bags. So, there's not really any way to defeat those, sort of taking the car apart and actually taking the bag out of the car. So just bear that in mind as you're moving around inside of a vehicle, that you could have an airbag deployment. Lots of flooding. Jan talked yesterday with tsunamis, you're not going to have as much flooding because the tsunami is going to recede, versus if we have river flooding, we're dealing with moving across rivers or anything like that. Number one, don't attempt to cross swift-moving water. Flooding can be very deceiving. It can be kind of, the water doesn't appear to be moving that fast, but you can have undercurrents underneath it. If you've got basically stagnant water, it's okay to move around in, but anything that's got any type of movement or current, to avoid. Mud can cause potential entrapment hazards, icy conditions if you're moving around in cold water, hypothermic issues. Electrical equipment, machinery can still be energized, so you still have to run the risk of, as you're moving around any type of machinery or equipment, that water now has become energized, so as you come close to that equipment, you could get an electrical shock. The big thing is with flooding, what happens when the waters rise? What comes up with it? All of your sewers. So you have pretty much everything you can think of you're going to be wading around in. Biological waste, biohazards, hazardous materials, it's now all floating in that surface. Diesel, fuel, gas. So as you're working your way through these flooded areas, bear in mind that you're going to be basically wading through everything. Good idea once you come back to the boot to decon as much as you can. One thing, and Bale might touch it, but moving through flooded areas, if you have the ability to ziplock all of your stuff in your backpack, if you work all day in a flooded area and you don't think about it, you come back and you open up your backpack and now that flood water has seeped up into your backpack and all of your clean clothes are now wet and dirty and contaminated. If you can have a vacuum sealer, if you can vacuum seal them, then you actually will be able to come back and you have dry socks, dry underwear, dry clothes to be able to change into. Debris, strainers, things as you're walking through, there could be any type of, again, we're talking about everything is in the water now floating around. So you can't see what's underneath you as well either. So move cautiously through water. You don't know if you're going into an area that has any type of the soil has been turned up. So now you're going to talk about any type of fall hazards, trip hazards, if they're pitting. So flood are not very, you just have to move cautiously through these so that you don't run into anything that you could actually sink into or fall. The last thing you want to do is hopefully not trip and get soaking wet and have to spend the rest of the day soaked. Hazmat, avoid altogether. All the methyl alkyl, the bad stuff, everything up there will kill you. Glowworms love this kind of stuff. I just know if it's placarded, leave. If there's any type of placard, you don't want to be anywhere around it. Basically, hazmat, a lot of stuff reacts with water. So now you've just introduced, if we have flooding, now we've just introduced water into some type of hazmat that strongly reacts with water. Now we have an explosive hazard. They're usually unstable, pretty much toxic to everything. So the easiest thing to do is just avoid them altogether. Now that also means that you've got a lot of road traffic. So anything on the road, tankers, stuff like that, they should all be placarded as well. We have the ability, we have the DOT guidebooks, we could actually look up what each placard says and the DOT guide number, see what it is. It might be inert, it might be just food grade product or something, but in the environment that we're going to be working in with a disaster, it's just easier if you see a placard to avoid it altogether. So this is angry dog. This is supposed to be a criminal sneaking out the back window. Some other hazards that you don't think of but have occurred: animals. Any type of a disaster environment, a lot of people leave their animals. Well, what do those now become? Become a hazard. They're hungry, they're starving. I talked to a group that were down in Katrina, and after several days, the dogs not being fed, they started to kind of pack up. They started hunting the people that were doing the searching. They noticed that the dogs were starting to track them, and they're starving. They're looking for food. The big one here is the threat of violence. So there's always the threat of violence. We're taking a community or a city or something and pretty much stressing them to their absolute maximum level. You're not going to be able to control a lot of people. The criminal element, we saw the picture of the guy sneaking out. The real world is that people are going to take advantage of any type of opportunity where they have a stress and ease of breaking into things. So there's always that potential of a criminal element as you're moving through, as you're going into houses. We don't really see meth labs anymore. That's pretty much kind of gone away, but there's always a potential of walking into some type of crime scene, some type of drug lab. If you have the ability, and it's not probably initially, the first arriving groups aren't going to have that ability, but if you have the ability to have force protection with you, that's definitely something that's nice to have. They can assess if you get into a situation where you have like behavioral somebody who's stressed out, who has a gun, who wants you to treat their mom, you're not leaving my mom, you're going to stay here, you're going to treat, and they're threatening violence. To have that force protection is good. If you don't, the best thing is just try to avoid that situation if you can, but that's an underlying element that's going to always be there. Just for everybody, because I know it's right first thing in the morning, lava. I grew up right outside of Mount St. Helens, so I mean, you never know, right? It's possible. We live near an active volcano, so that was actually more of a joke. My other Far Side comic. This her thing says recipe for disaster. So just real quick summary, obviously hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Dead of winter, you still need to be drinking a lot of water. We're talking 12-hour operational periods or more. Who knows when you're going to get relieved? So make sure you have water. Always make sure you move in groups of at least 2. We don't want anybody going out on solo missions. Always have good communications. Take the time, stop, check comms, make sure that I can get back to IC or I can get in touch with my team leader. Dress appropriately. That's a big one. Layers. Make sure as you're working today, obviously today is different because it's nice weather, but accidents and disasters don't normally happen in the nice summer, 80-degree weather, 0 humidity. We're talking middle of winter, cold, extreme heat, extreme cold. So pre-thinking that, have those layers in your pack ready to go as you can shift out. If you're getting too hot, too cold, you can add or take off those layers. Always have good situational awareness and make sure you're constantly evaluating your area. You want to be just basically a 360 head on a swivel. I'm checking to make sure there's, always looking for hazards. Always constantly looking for hazards. Kind of taking a pull from the wildland side, you always want to have not a safety person per se, but someone who's just kind of standing back. And if you're in a building or someone who is kind of just being the eyes, making sure he's looking for safety, kind of a constant evaluation and checking the scene. But that situational awareness is significant. Everybody needs to do their part to kind of keep your eyes open, making sure that you're looking out for hazards or potential hazards, making sure you alert people, your team members, to potential hazards, and then if it's a bigger enough hazard, passing that up your chain of command, let IC know. Questions at all on the hazards? Which are very, very brief. We just kind of skimmed over it. So just really briefly, some USAR search markings, urban search and rescue, the FEMA, this is the standard FEMA search markings that you'll see. If you go into an area after a FEMA team, you're going to see these structural assessments. The FEMA teams have a structural engineer usually on with them when they come into an area, and so he'll actually move through and he'll do structural assessments on buildings to determine whether or not they're safe to enter. A box like that, okay to enter, relatively safe. You can go in, conduct search. You can enter the building and do what you need to do. If you see a box with a slash, there's some damage. They might need to do some shoring. They might need to do some hazards remove before you can enter, but it's still okay to enter. Any box like this with an X means that the engineer has assessed it and you're not allowed to go into it. He's structurally, it's not safe, and they're going to have to do a lot of shoring and extensive safety measures before you can make entry. So any type of box like this, if he put an X through that, then you're not going to make entry into that house. If you don't have those structural markings, if the FEMA team hasn't got there yet and they haven't moved through an area and they haven't been able to assess everything, then it falls back on the teams to kind of make an assessment. Your light damage, superficial, not a lot of structural involvement, broken windows, some cracks, minor damage to the interior contents, that building is going to be safe to enter. You can go into that, you can conduct search and rescue out of there. Moderate damage, obviously visible signs, the decorative work outside is damaged. You see a lot of cracks. There's major damage to the interior contents, but it's still sitting on its foundation. It's still relatively upright. You can enter it only to make quick life-saving. If you can get walking wounded out, if you can get to someone quickly and extricate them out. But anybody that's heavily trapped inside of here, you're not going to be able to remain very long, and you're not going to be able to conduct any type of operations. It's just more of a quick get in, get the patients, and get out. And then heavy, obviously we're not going to go into those at all. You can see the structural assessment. He's come through. It's a no-brainer. There's no more walls. Basically, the roof is now sitting where the house used to be. But they'll still assess it. He's deemed that it's not structurally safe to enter. Do not enter in these buildings under any circumstances. The likelihood of finding viable patients in there is probably going to be small, and you're going to waste more time trying to get in there, do any type of assessment, and then you're also putting yourself at risk by trying to enter into a building like that. So when you do enter into a building to make a search, this is the national standard. There's also an international standard that's very similar to the search markings that you'll see. As you enter into a building, at a main entry point, front door, or the most obvious entry point that you would expect people to go through, you make a slash. That single slash, next to it, you write your team ID. Here, this is out of the task force for the FEMA teams, but you could put MERT Team 1 or whatever it is your team designation is for that time. So you put your team ID and then the date and time that you entered in. When you're done with your search and as you come out, you make another slash. Upon that exiting, you put your date and time noted in that top. So this is where I enter, this is where I left, and then the other two spots on the X down here to the right is rats, or basically any hazards you see in the house or in the commercial building or the structure you're going into. So it could be a sewer, could be rats, could be ammunition, any type of hazard that you encounter while you're inside there. And then on the bottom, how many victims, live and dead, that you found in there. When all that's been done and a new search has been started, you cross out the old search marking so that you can see that there's a new search has been started. You'll see, if you go and pull up pictures of like Katrina, you'll see houses with multiple search markings on them. Every time that the floodwaters receded in Katrina, they would have to go back and research that house. So that's why you see these multiple times. That's why I talk about when you do a new search in that house, you cross that out so everybody recognizes that it's already been searched, or at least in the flooding situation, it's already been searched at that level. Now we're searching at a new level. The idea behind this is that as teams are moving through and they're searching, if you have a mobile command or safety or somebody, they can walk down a street and see, okay, I've got a team that's actively inside that building working. I've got a team that's in there. Oh, the search has been completed in that building, so I can, if they're working on it from a map, or if they're trying to keep track, they can actually, okay, this building's been searched, I can move on. Okay, that one's still got an active search. So it gives the ability for people to see or a safety to be able to see what's going on. That also tells teams as they're coming back through, if they're researching, gives me an idea, okay, how many rats. And then also in the number of victims, as the extrication teams come in, how many people am I looking for inside of that building? How many dead, how many alive are we going to be moving out of that building? If for some reason you can't complete the search, just draw a big dot right in the middle. So if, for say, there's an aftershock and you have to exit out of the building, if you can, just a quick spray paint of a circle in the middle. So that means, that lets everybody know that we started a search in there, we weren't able to complete it. So when we're searching, we enter into a building, first thing you want to do, call out to survivors. If anybody can hear my voice, come to me. Be very vocal. Come to me, come to my voice, come here, come this way, come this way. You're making a lot of noise so they can hear you. Big one is you're finding people as they're coming to you, start asking them questions. How many people were in there? If it's a residential, wife, kids, how many people were in the house? It's an apartment complex, who lives in your apartment? If it's a commercial area, how many people were working today? Where were they located at? Do you have any idea where would I find people? Talk to the people as they're coming out. They're going to be shocked, they're going to be confused, but you can glean a ton of information from them as they exit that building, and as you're finding them, okay, who was in this room with you? Who else was in here? Who else was in this office space with you? People, especially during earthquakes, they're going to seek protection. They'll go to bathtubs, under desks, inside cabinets, under next to beds, inside closets. As you're standing here thinking about it, it doesn't seem very, why would someone hide in a closet? Why would someone hide in a bed? But that's typically where, especially in like house fires, where we found a lot of people and not in the areas you would expect to find them. Kids are notorious for going under beds for some reason during fires. Same thing with, that they seek that during an earthquake or any type of disaster, they're going to seek that protection. They're going to go under some place that they feel is safe. So if you have the ability to, search thoroughly, pull back the blankets, check the bed, check under the bed, check the closets, check inside the tubs, check behind the doors. Things that you wouldn't think normally you would find people in, you're going to potentially find them there. So think kind of outside the box of where we would normally expect to see people. In a residential, commercial type, the most common is a wall search. So the idea behind it is that you come in and you just stay on your right arm on that wall the entire time. That helps you orient yourself. You can see they just basically work their way around the entire building doing a right-hand search, always staying with that wall to their right-hand side. They're able to conduct a search of the entire space. Bottom, top floor down for a single-story multi-building. You have to kind of make that decision if you've got a multi-story building. Do we start from the bottom? Do we work our way up, or do we go to the top and work our way down? But that's something that you decide as a team initially, and then everybody goes and follows that pattern. The big thing is stopping frequently. Make a lot of noise, but make sure that you stop and you listen. Everybody quiet. Listen for tapping. Listen for movement. Listen for voices. They may not be able to yell out, but you can hear them tapping. If they can get a foot or if they can get to a pipe or something, you might hear some tapping. So stopping frequently to listen is key when you're doing any type of search like that. And then if you're searching an exterior, it's basically kind of a grid search. If you've got a large area, hand to hand, shoulder to shoulder, depending on the number of people you have, and it's just basically a line, you're just doing a grid search. Search down, then turn around if you need to, come back if you need to do counter. So you're looking on the ground, looking for anything that might indicate there might be somebody, if it's under rubble, looking for, again, that tapping, movement, trying to find any type of a voice. And then whoever is keeping track, you want to definitely mark those areas that you search. That outside person that's on that line can tie a flagging as they're doing that grid. So that way, if you need to grid a larger area, you go to where that flagging was and you start again, make your pass. So just making sure that you mark everything off as you're searching. Questions?
If you've got one of your buildings that's collapsed, it's not going in, no way.
Mm-hmm.
But someone inside is yelling for help?
If they can crawl out, if not, you need to move on. The reason I say that, and it's something that's it's extremely difficult to do because there's someone that's alive in that building. But you have to recognize, one, that if you go into there, you put yourself in the potential of getting hurt. Now you've been taking out, so now you have assets that have to take care of you, so now you've taken part of your team that's now helping you take you back to some type of treatment. And the reality of it is you're probably going to need a large team to be able to get them out. They're buried under rubble. You're going to need a search team or a USAR team. They'll have to do structural assessment. They'll have to shore it. They'll have to work their way into that patient, and it could be potentially hours. You would report, yeah. Report it. You can yell at them. I've got help coming. Report it and move on.
Do you ever downgrade hazards cleared or pressure ulcers you don't downgrade? Do you scribble it out?
If you mitigate it, like on the X talking about, if you mitigate it, so like say if there was a gun and you had force protection with you and they removed the gun out of it, then you could exit out. But usually I would just leave it because you never know. I mean, you're not gonna be able to mitigate a lot of the hazards. If there's a drug lab or if there's open electrical wiring in room 2, or so there's lots of you're not gonna be able to mitigate. And that just kind of gives everybody kind of a key as they're going into that building too. Hey, look out for this hazard. So, yep, sorry. The guys with the guns, the military. If you have, I know in a lot of the, like Katrina, Haiti, a lot of it was military that were providing force protection for the USAR teams. In the initial disaster is probably going to be your local law enforcement. If you can grab an officer or even a security guard, someone that has a little bit more they're trained in dealing with behavioral or people that are going to be aggressive. You know, a lot of us aren't really experienced in handling aggressive people. And so if someone has that experience, and you won't see that initially, that's more as the scene starts to drag on, where they're starting to starve and they're starting to get aggressive. You know, they're starving to death, or they don't have the resources they need. They're going to do whatever it takes to get those resources, and that's where you start to kind of see that aggressive behavior ramp up. And by that point, hopefully, you have some type of contingent that's there, military or police or something that can help provide that.
Thank you. I was thinking you meant weapons for us, but you actually meant another.
I know. Yeah, we wouldn't arm the teams. We're actually talking about someone who has been trained in that type of work. All right, I will pass it over to Bill.
A little background about me. I'm a paramedic with Oregon. I worked in the 911 system in that. I currently work for Kaiser. And then my side gig is I'm a search and rescue paramedic for Mountain Wave. You may see them. They're regularly the ones doing the climb or rescues up on Mount Hood. We're primarily a overhead team for communications and command and support, hence the medical side. So a lot of the people that are climbing that may not be medical. I get advanced staged a lot of times, and when they have an injury or they find somebody that needs medical assistance, they'll call us up. So I do basically the backup and support for that. From there, I'm going to have Josh introduce himself, and then we'll go from there.
Is this working? Maybe it's working. All right, perfect. Good morning. My name is Josh Weston. The military folks, I'm just going to throw this disclaimer out really quickly. Yes, I know I didn't shave this morning. Yes, I'm on a waiver. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I got this clip today. I'm just like, what is this guy doing? I only found out I was going to speak like 3 minutes ago or so, and so the only people who are more cringing than I am is probably Major Schroeder or Major Shink in the back. So if I offend anybody, please go to those guys and not to me, because I'm just kind of a nerd back there. So my background started off like 18 years ago in fire and medicine. I've been a firefighter, EMT, then an intermediate, then a paramedic. And I've worked in a whole bunch of different environments. So most of my time was spent civilian side, fire department, and then I did a bunch of search and rescue stuff. I did flight medicine for the Forest Service and have done medicine out in the field for a long time for the forest. So I'm used to being out for like 2 weeks at a time with limited help, limited things like that. So that's kind of where some of my background comes from. I won't bore you with the rest of the details, but my current gig is I work for Salem Fire Department down in Salem, Oregon, and then I work with the 125th STS and the 142nd Medical Group up at Pang. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to show you some of the stuff that for basic search and rescue we carry, and then the advanced stuff, some of the medical equipment we carry. We're going to try and run through this real quick, and then we're going to have you guys come forward and you can touch and feel some of the stuff and ask some direct questions. So I'm going to try and go pretty quick. So I'm going to try and show you some of the stuff, the basics that we carry and you can carry. A lot of it is fairly simple if you spend any time in the outdoors. But I also want to point out one of the things always, everybody on my team, we make them carry in their pocket is a set of gloves. Being a provider with the uniform or whatever, people come out of the woodwork and suddenly come running up to you bleeding and gushing blood or whatever. So everybody should have a pair of gloves in their pocket, as if you're representing any organization or anything on like a deployment like this, people are going to see you and immediately come to you. Even if you're not the provider, they're going to assume that you're part of it and they can treat you. So some of the basic things we carry. I'm going to go with, we like to try and travel light as possible or spread out the gear amongst each other. What you see is pretty much a lot of the stuff I carry, and it can weigh you down a lot. So as the mission goes, adjust your pack. Case in point, 6 months ago, these things were invaluable. You couldn't walk around without them. Today, we're not going to need them. The other thing is water, shelter, and fire. So should always be carrying water, but at the same time, have a water filter to add to it. And then there's several different types of filter. There's the tabs. The filter And then they also have the UV lights. I like the filter, so if you end up in an austere environment and like in OSO, there was diesel and everything running everywhere, the filters generally try and pick that up a lot more. The tablets, you're still going to get it. Same with the UV lights. A couple of the other things you want to carry several different ways. I carry a lighter and then a flint. I wish I could hold this. Oh, that's what that. My apologies. Oh, that's what that's for. And there's several different flints. You want to recommend there's better ones than others. And I'll bring it. So you want one that has fairly good spark. Some of them will just spark a little bit. That'll start a good fire. As medical personnel, you usually carry gauze. That's a great tinder. Add a little Vaseline to it. It'll burn for about 5 minutes versus the gauze will just burn up real quick. But it's something you're always packing with you as a medical equipment. MREs are great. They're a good quick source of food. And then when you're cooking, I'm pretty cheap. A lot of this stuff is fairly cheap. I use a soup can. The other reason is if you cook on an open fire with this, put it back in your pack, it turns everything all sooty. This, when I'm done, it's gone. Pack all your little light stuff in it. You also have the little whisper light stoves. These are great for quick light. A couple of the interesting pieces of equipment I carry. I also fairly like to cheat. I carry a shrink-wrapped survival blanket tent. Our department generally recommends you can use a tarp. You can set this up real quick. Piece of zip line or across trees, hold it up. You have a great shelter for your patient. Even if you have 2 people, just hold it up. The other thing I really recommend from the military I've stolen is the heated blankets. 90% of the patients I come across are hypothermic or cold. This is basically a 4-foot by 3-foot blanket that's like a hot hand warmer. It's some of the casualty bags from the military. These things are about 25 bucks. The other thing is if you're ever stuck out in the cold, I'm going to wear this if I get cold. A couple other basic navigation things is your basic compass. Again, I cheat. We're also supposed to carry a mirror. It comes with a mirror, so you can signal. GPS. Most people now carry GPS. They have them in their phones. And then one of the other things, everything I carry is modularized. I think I covered some of that. And then I carry also a few other toys. I can show you those as I come up. So I'll let Josh go from there and show you some of his stuff.
So I think one of the big things to think about when you're doing pack out is what's my mission set? How long am I going to be out there? So if I'm going out for just a day, like I'm going to go do a search and I have a place to come back to, I don't necessarily need to carry everything for that, right? Like, so I could carry a platypus with 3 liters of fluid on me for the day and not have to carry a water filter system, right? If I'm just going out for the day. If I'm going out for a 2-day or I have a situation where I'm going to be out overnight or possibly overnight, that's when you need to start thinking about those types of things. So your pack outs are going to change really depending on what's going on for the day or what the mission set's going to be. We talked about with this in our con ops plan for the military side, we talked about being able to support ourselves for 3 days. That's a really tough thing to do. 3 days of food, 3 days of water for a 6 or 7 man team is basically, I could fill up each one of us with a bag of this stuff and not have any med equipment at all. Which leads me to the next thing. How much medical treatment are you going to get to do out in the field when you come across most of your casualties? We've joked about this in the past because our SURF PE team has ventilators and they have oxygen systems and they have all this stuff. Well, all that's great if you can put a person on a ventilator and you have a way to transport them to definitive care. Otherwise, that ventilator works until it runs out of oxygen, and now you've got somebody assigned to bagging that person until they die. So we have to look at really what our mission set is and what we're actually packing out for. One of the other pieces of equipment that I carry is a little water straw. It's a filter system. I don't have it here with me, but it's a straw basically. You can dip it down into a creek and actually suck water in through that. That's good for, probably 4 or 5 days worth of use if you needed to, and it's about the size of this microphone. So you really have to kind of weigh out what do I need for my self-survival piece versus what am I actually going to be able to do to treat people medically. And for how many people here work in a clinic or work in a hospital? Show of hands, group of people. Yeah, there's a huge majority of people that are used to working clinical environments. So we're used to having all of this stuff. Oh, I've got oxygen systems, I've got suction, I've got electronic suction, I've got, everything at my dispensary. But when you're out there, most of that stuff is kind of useless to us. In fact, the only reason I have an oxygen tank with me today is because I'm out here with you guys and we're doing real world. So yeah, I don't necessarily carry this in the forest with me at all times, because that's kind of a ridiculous piece of equipment. Because once this D cylinder runs out in 15 minutes, what have I done? Well, I've done a little bit of good for 15 minutes and my extract's another 2 to 3 hours. All right, good job, right? We're not really effectively doing anything good here. So you really have to look at what it is you can effectively handle and take care of for a longer set of time. As far as staying warm and all those types of things, that's a super important piece. Again, looking at what the mission set is. How many people are from Idaho here? There was a bunch of people from Idaho, right? Got a handful of people from Idaho, and there was people from Arizona too, right? What are the temperature extremes from nighttime temps to daytime temps in the summertime? I mean, I know around here we can go from, on the coast, 100 degrees in the afternoon, which is a record for around here, to 40 degrees at night. So there's huge temperature variances. So if you're out overnight, you need to be thinking about what the coldest is. I've been on fires where we were out for 2 weeks where it actually froze and snow on us. So there is a huge variance there that you have to think about for yourself. What we talked about in our group mission set is if we had 6-man teams, 3 people are going to be carrying all our support stuff: tents, backpacks, heat equipment, food, all that stuff, and maybe 1 or 2 people is going to be carrying med equipment at the most, because our med equipment is going to get used up really quickly. You have 200 people that come to you, and we're talking small, right? This whole area, they were talking about thousands and thousands of casualties. I'm going to run out of gauze in this pack. I could fill this entire pack with the most compact gauze system in the world, and I will run out of gauze in the first 100 patients. I mean, that's the reality of it. So we have to really think about what it is we're carrying and how many people we can actually affect with what we are carrying. So that's kind of the big piece, I think, to really thinking about your pack out, is exactly what is it I'm going to affect for that day, or that 2 days, or that 3 days, and then how am I going to survive? Because if I become a casualty, I shut down the entire operation. So
Put that down there.
just throw it down.
Everything's resilient.
Yeah. So a lot of the stuff that, even the stuff I'm carrying up here, I'm actually doing real world medicine out of this, over the next couple days as well. So like, this pack isn't set up for anything more than actually just walking around and having a place to go back to every night. I'm not carrying anything survival in here. There's maybe some snacks and some water in this pack, and that's it. So this is basically all med in this one. He's got a much better setup for showing you what survival stuff there is. I always, of course, tell people you need to have a knife on you, a really good knife, or a couple of good knives on you, because that's an indispensable tool you'll use all the time. Some kind of fire starter. I'm definitely not as mountain man as he is as far as carrying flint. I carry a big lighter. I carry a couple other things because I'm lazy. I mean, realistically, and I want to get it done quick. So, but that stuff is all stuff you need to consider. GPS units are great. I always carry a GPS, but when you carry GPS units, what else do we need to carry all the time? A lot of extra batteries, right? Because batteries go down really quickly. Same thing with your radio. If you're going out in a situation where you have a radio, and like I said, I've gone out into Alaska, dropped off by helicopter. There's no roads for 30 miles, and your only pickup is helicopter. I'm carrying a pack of batteries and dropping it at a drop point because my radio is going to run out every other day. So just those types of things you got to think about. Once you lose comms, you really lose a lot of your echelon of control and all the things that you need to get more supplies or to get more help, or if things go bad. That's really your big tool. So thinking about that stuff. And I say this kind of jokingly. It's like, oh, I'm planning a 24-hour day or a 72-hour mission set. You know what? You may have to look at the fact that that may not happen the way that you planned it. You may not get picked up for a couple extra days. We had a situation in Alaska where a fire came back on us, went through our camp. And because of pumpkin time, and those of you who are in the flight world kind of understand, once the ship flies so many hours in a day, it's not allowed to fly anymore. Well, they're like, well, we can't fly for another day and a half to get to you guys. So we had an extra day and a half that we didn't get picked up for our stuff that we had to kind of live off of. So planning for the unexpected is another big piece to this when you're talking about your pack outs. Anything else you want to throw on this?
Well, just to give you an example, Josh is also carrying a select version of ALS kit. The kit that we're carrying for real world medical in the back is actually 3 bags versus, so this is a condensed version of that, and then I carry a condensed version, something like that. So do you want to invite people up? Anybody wants to look at some of our toys?
If you guys want, we've got another 15 minutes to burn up, and instead of you guys sitting here listening to us jabber, why don't you come up, take a look at some of the stuff we have, pick through it, ask questions about where you can get some of this stuff. The other thing I was going to say about this is Also, knowing your physical limitations, like it's great to say, oh, look, I got this bag packed with 68 pounds of stuff. How long can you effectively carry your 68-pound pack? For how long? Over what type of terrain are you going through? What kind of situations are you going to get yourself into with that weight, etc. So just things to think about while you're going through that stuff. So.
And another thing we don't want to see is, so please drink lots of water today.